Good morning, everybody. It's Jeff Goldberg for the Sales Pro Network. If you happen to catch the very beginning, I pressed the wrong button. That was the wrong introduction, but here we are. It is Friday, January 19th at 10 a.m. Eastern. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I am a sales coach and trainer. I work with both individuals and organizations internationally to help them do one thing and one thing only: increase their sales. And I founded the Sales Pro Network a little over 3 years ago, actually 3.5 years ago now, to elevate the profession of sales, to give salespeople a place where they can hang out, network with each other, learn from each other, ask questions, get great advice from people just like today's guest, and pretty much just make more money. If you're watching us live, please say hello in the comments. If you're watching us live on Facebook but have not connected your account to StreamYard, it's not going to say your name. We only see Facebook users, so please include your name. And of course, if you have any questions for today's guest, please put those in the comments and I'll pass them along as we're talking. And finally, if you're watching us on the replay, please put replay in the comments. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to the founder and president of, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Frabble Business Development Solutions. And this guy's been named a top business strategy voice on LinkedIn. Please welcome today's guest, Chris Spafford. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Jeff. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you today. Good morning, Suzanne Taylor, one of my favorite coaches in the world. In fact, Suzanne and I are doing some group coaching next Tuesday, the 23rd, in our Sales Pro Network Insider community. And we're going to be talking about marketing messages that attract an audience. And if anybody's interested in that, you can go to crushsalesgoals.com. crushsalesgoals.com. It's $1 to get in for the first month. And you definitely want to join Suzanne because she is fantastic. I'll be there too, by the way. So, Chris, before I ask you the 1,000,001 questions I have for you with your expertise, would you maybe give us the 2-minute background of what brought you up to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent 30 years in a corporate environment leading sales and marketing teams globally. Had the opportunity in 2021 to start my own business. And, as you progress up the career ladder, you just move further and further away from what you really love to do. It becomes really politicky, right? So I love to build business and I love to build people. And so when I started my business, the real focus is on taking my expertise in sales and marketing and sharing that with small to mid-sized companies to strengthen their foundations.
Got it. Okay. And what is fractional business leadership? Because I know that's one of the things you offer.
Yeah, so actually that's where my company name came from. So I pronounce it Frable. It's not a real word, so I guess Frable doesn't really matter. But it is fractional business leadership, right? Because when I started the company, all the cool names were gone. I had to come up with something. So there's really two things to remember about fractional business leadership. One is part-time, right? So you hire a fractional business leader. They're not sitting in your office 5 days a week. They're going to be there for a portion of the week leading whatever function they're leading, right? The other thing is it's a lot less expensive than hiring a full-time executive with the same level of experience. And that's the real key, right? The same level of experience, because you can go out and you can hire someone full-time with a lot less experience, but they're going to be going through the same growing pains that I went through for all those years. And what I try to tell people is, look, I save you time, right? I save you the pain that I suffered in making those mistakes and learning from them. That's the benefit of my experience. So I can get a lot more done really quickly.
Got it. So I was about to ask you a loaded question because I also offer something similar called outsourced sales management. My question was going to be, can you, in a part-time position, do the same thing that a full-time sales manager would do or sales leader would do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at a typical small business, right, what's the evolution? The evolution is you've got a founder who started the business, they own the business, they were doing everything at one point, and they kind of migrated into leading everything. And from a sales perspective, they most likely spend less than 4 hours a week leading their sales team, right? So as a fractional sales leader, typically you're in there for a minimum 8 hours a week. and it's double the time the CEO is putting in, and the CEO probably doesn't have the same background you do, right? They're an expert in their thing, probably not an expert in sales and marketing. So that 8 hours really contributes a lot more value to the company than not. And there's another part of this, right? The subtle part. You need to be leading the right people. If you're not leading the right people, there's not enough hours in the week to get the job done. So that's an important aspect of it. But if you have the right people, absolutely you can.
Yeah, I find the same thing. Every client that I've taken on where I become their outsourced sales manager has been a situation just like you described. The salespeople are reporting directly to the owner of the company, the founder, the owner, the president. I don't care what you call them. And the challenge there is they don't know how to manage salespeople, and it's a unique skill it's almost like herding cats sometimes. But salespeople have a variety of different personalities, and we've got a job to get done. And the president or founder typically does not know how to do that. Plus, not only do they not know how to lead a sales team, they're wasting too much of their time trying to do that instead of running their company. So I'm actually it does sound self-serving, but I'm a big fan of what you're doing. Good morning, John Hill. Good to see you. Bruce Casserman, always a pleasure to see you here. And Don Levine, our executive recruiter. Good to see you too. One of the things that I've been advising salespeople, and I actually didn't write this down because I do have a bunch of written down questions for you, but one of the things I've been telling all my coaching clients is that one of the things I see quite often is that salespeople at the beginning of the year, you make a big push at the end of the year to hit your quota. Hopefully you do it or you exceed it. And of course, not everybody does. But at the beginning of the year, everybody kind of relaxes and says, okay, I've got 12 months, 52 weeks, plenty of time to hit my goal. I've been saying absolutely not. You got to go as if it's the end of the year right now. You got to go like crazy because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, who could have anticipated COVID a few years ago? None of us. It came out of nowhere. It drastically changed everything, including our ability to sell. So are you on board with that? Should they be going full out now, or should they be kind of easing into it? What do you think about that?
Full out 100% of the time. Because again, this goes back to people, right? The people mentality. When you bring on the right organization, their hair is on fire. They are high energy individuals that need to be out pushing and selling, right? I mean, that's the type of individual I want. If you've got someone who's looking at a slow start, you probably got the wrong person.
So I'm with you. I certainly only want to work with teams full of high performers, but it's not typically the case, especially when you work with large organizations. And like you, I've worked with small to medium-sized businesses. I've also worked with major companies like Aramark and Siemens and Cisco and companies like that. And not everybody's a superstar. Not everybody's a hard charger. So how do you take those middle of the road performers and make them better? Your top performers, really, my opinion is let them do whatever they want as long as they don't lie, cheat, or steal. The bottom percent, you're probably never going to get to be anywhere, and they probably shouldn't have been hired in the first place. But what about those with potential? What do you do with those people to get them up to that next level?
I think it's consistent mentoring and training, right? I mean, so you're right. The 80-20 rule exists in any sales force, right? You've got 20% who are going to be your superstars, and you've got 80% who are not, and you've got that bottom 10 or 20% that just are never going to make it, and that's your revolving door. No matter how hard you try, you're going to wind up with those folks. Sometimes, not always, sometimes. So for the folks who are in the middle, who really want to learn, they want to be better, I think it's incumbent on the company, on the sales leader, to provide them the skills training to cover the gaps in their performance, right? So if they have trouble handling objections or they have trouble closing deals, that's something that you need to provide to them or help them, coach them through those problems directly. And ultimately, your goal is to make them a superstar.
Yeah, I like what you said about consistent and ongoing. I'm betting that, like me, you get asked to come in and do a day of training here, a day of training there. I call that training in his event. And really, look, I'm very good at what I do, and I know you are too. And I'm very entertaining. I'm a stand-up comedian on the side. I engage people, but the only thing a day of training does really is pay my mortgage. And I actually tell prospects that when they want, just come in and do a day of training. Like, I'll come in and do it, but you're not going to get anything out of it except my bills get paid, because I can't, as good as either of us or any other trainer is, you can't move the needle in one day. But training plus constant reinforcement that's where you move the needle. So I agree with you 100%. I understand that much of your business is built around helping companies put like a sustainable and a scalable business development infrastructure in place. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I come across companies that are in one of three stages, right? So the first stage is typically a newer company growing really fast, and you have an owner that's really aware of their surroundings. They want intentional growth, and they know that they don't have the time or maybe the skill set to put together a solid infrastructure, right? So there's one need. There's another need where maybe the company's not keeping pace with the market. They're not growing at the same rate as the market, or just not meeting the owner's goals in terms of what the owner wants for growth. And the last one is probably a more mature company where you've got a founder that was really good at creating this one product or service, and that helped the company grow to a certain point, and all of a sudden they flatlined or they started to go backwards. And now the owner's frustrated and they just don't know how to resolve the problem, right? So what do I do? I really focus on four major areas. I call them the four pillars of infrastructure, which is strategy, process, organization, and analytics, right? Not every company needs all of those components. Some are better than others in certain areas. So, my first meeting is to try to assess where are they in the infrastructure development for their business, and then we'll just do a gap analysis and say, okay, these are the areas where there's probably room for improvement. Let's work on those.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned there are four pillars, right? Which one do you attack first?
Strategy, without a doubt. Strategy is the roadmap. It's the same for sales as it is for marketing. I don't know, quite honestly, I don't know how you move forward without a strategy. And so, what strategy consists of? On the sales side, the first and most important thing I think for any business is understanding what is your unique value proposition in the marketplace. What do you do different from everybody else that really is different? Great customer service. Yeah, no, because I can buy great customer service, right? That comes quick. If I have a patent, a defendable patent, well, that's really unique, right? What does that bring to the clients? So strategy always comes first in my mind. So unique value proposition, first component. Second is channel. How are you going to market? What's the appropriate way? And I'm often amazed and probably take for granted. I've been through a lot in terms of my career, all the different channels, right? So I've worked with direct salespeople, independent manufacturers, reps, distribution, international brokers, you name it, I've worked with them. And a lot of folks don't really realize the options that are available to them in the marketplace. So when you start talking about how to cover the market, right, your available market, they're only thinking direct sales. I need to put a salesperson in, and there's no way you're going to get the amount of coverage that you can with some of these other vehicles if that's your business. So that channel winds up becoming a large part of that as well. And then of course you target customers, like working up ideal customer profiles, things of that nature. And some might say that crosses boundaries with marketing. Yeah, it might, but guess what? In a small company, the two are probably really closely intertwined. So I'm glad my experience is in both, because I found there's probably a larger need on the marketing side than on the sales side, right? Marketing today is about 70% of the entire sales and marketing ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm always shocked, not really shocked, but always stunned when a company tells me, "Oh yeah, what makes us different is our great customer service." You mentioned that before. It's just the wrong thing to do, because everybody says they give great customer service. But if you think about you as a consumer, or anybody who's listening as a consumer, how many of the companies that you deal with as a customer actually deliver great customer service? Almost none. I mean, there are a few real standouts like Zappos, great customer service, amazing customer service. And I can certainly name a few others, but most don't. So when you say we give great customer service and most people go, nobody gives great customer service, you've just gotten rid of your unique selling proposition. So I'm with you 1,000,000%. And Coach Suzanne says that being brave enough to do this as a company or an individual is a step outside the norm and the comfort zone. Absolutely. And John Hill wants to know, have you ever asked the sales force, what is it that you sell, and see what type of answers you get? I'm going to let you answer in a moment, Chris, but I ask every sales team that. And, typically, salespeople don't know what they really sell. And before I say why, I'm going to let you expand on that, Chris.
Yeah, so I ask it, maybe I ask it in a different way because I'm looking for how they position it, right? How they position their product or service. And 9 times out of 10, salespeople are selling features. They're talking about the features of what they have, their gizmo or their service. And I just look at them with a blank face and I just tell them, I don't care. I really don't care. It doesn't matter because you haven't told me what my benefit is. Salespeople, the great salespeople, they sell benefits. They're all tuned in to everyone's favorite radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? Because if that message isn't coming through loud and clear, you've lost them. You've left it up to them to determine what the value proposition is. Don't leave it up to them. Give it to them by selling benefits. And that's why I asked the question, because I don't want to hear about the gizmo. I want to hear how they position it so that I'm going to value what they're talking about.
On the money, exactly right. Just by accident, I've done a ton of work training people who sell advertising. And when I ask advertising salespeople, and I actually ask that exact question, what is it that you sell? And when I ask a room full of advertising salespeople what they sell, they always say the same thing. We sell advertising. But you don't sell advertising. You sell making the doorbell ring. You sell bringing in leads. That's what you sell. So I could not agree more. So let's get back to the 4 pillars. Once the appropriate marketing and sales strategies are developed, where do you go to next?
I go to process, right? Because again, this is a question that I ask business owners. Say, do you have a sales process? And I often get the head nod. Yeah, of course we do. Bill has a great process. He closes 9 out of 10 people he talks to. But then Sally's process is a little bit weaker. She only closes about half of who she talks to. And of course, I'm making up numbers. But as soon as I hear that, I hear about the individual processes. No, you don't have a sales process. And it's not intentional, right? I don't think they understand the value in having a uniform sales process that all the salespeople follow. It ties back to a lot of different things. I tell them it ties back to forecasting. They look at me and like they glaze over. What do you mean? So what I mean is, as you're starting to fill your pipeline and you've got the various stages of your pipeline, you should have a percentage of conversion to close at every stage of that pipeline. And you should be able to forecast at any given day what it's going to look like for whatever your sales cycle is, whatever you have in your pipeline. You should be able to give me a number, right? If everyone's sales process is different, those percentages are garbage. It's garbage in, garbage out. And so what I spend a lot of time with these companies on is what's the best sales process? Because now you've got a lot of different ones. You told me Bill's is the best, but let's examine that and let's examine what you think is the worst. And let's try to really find the reasons why. And ultimately, we wind up putting something together that looks maybe a little bit different from the best scenario. But in the case of the best scenario, there's a people component to it, right? Maybe Bill is really charismatic. He really builds relationships fast, right? He gets to that know, trust, like factor really quick. And maybe Sally can't do that as fast. So there are other components to it. So we really dig in deep to find the ideal process. And then it goes straight into CRM. And if they don't have a CRM, and some companies don't have a CRM, some don't need it, right? If you have 20 customers in the universe of customers, you don't need a CRM. You can do it on a spreadsheet. Not as elegant. You can do it. You can create a pipeline. It's a little bit more work, but that's the only argument I would have against not using CRM, just because the visibility, the pipeline, all the tools that are available, and now everything else that is included in CRM. So we spend a lot of time on that as well.
Yeah, and I always love when somebody says, "Oh yeah." Well, first of all, not having a uniform sales process is a management nightmare. You can't manage 15 different people or 20 or 50, 100 different people who are all doing something different, and expect to be effective at it. And I always love when somebody says, "Oh yeah, I close 90%, I close 100%." My answer is always, then I should be taking your class, because I don't close 90%, I don't close 100%. Almost nobody really does. And the other thing for me is, if somebody's really closing 90 to 100%, that tells me they're probably only getting easy deals. They're only working on really easy deals. And if that's enough to make enough money, terrific. But for most of us, it's not. It means you probably have to go up after a more challenging prospect that's going to, I don't want to say fight with you a little bit, but is harder to close. But you're probably going to close way more business by going after a lot of that. So it's one of my favorite. Oh yeah, well, I close 100%. Then why are we talking? Then why are we talking? If you're closing 100%, why are we talking at all? So okay, so now you've tackled strategy and you've tackled process. I would guess that organization is the next heavy lift. Is that right?
Yeah, organization is the next heavy lift and probably the most difficult lift, right? Because organization in a small company is there's a lot of personal relationships that wind up being developed, right? So I'm going through. I have a client right now. It's a bigger client, and they have an existing VP of sales marketing in a certain market segment, who by the president's own account is doesn't hold anyone accountable, loses focus, et cetera, et cetera, and really is protecting this individual. Right? He's loyal to the company, uh, great employee, real positive attitude, and those are all great characteristics. Don't get me wrong. But maybe where he's at is not the right place for him. Maybe this individual is a better individual contributor, right? So those are the hard conversations to have. Believe it or not, it's a lot easier when you walk into a company, and some of the smaller companies. I'm working with one right now, about $10 million. They don't have a salesperson, but they have the resources to go out and get it, and they realize they need to do it. And so basically, the ask is, can you build me a sales force? Absolutely. Love working with a blank slate, because now you can mold it, right? You can go out, you can hire the right people, and so I go through a pretty extensive process in organization to work up the job descriptions. Compensation plans is another big one. Um, I'm not a fan of capped commission structures, right? So always uncapped commission structures, and we go through all that. Commissions that get looked at, commission plans that get looked at once a year, as opposed to when you sign up, they're for life. Because quite honestly, the company's goals could be changing from year to year. If they're the same, great. If not, have the ability to change it. And then the hiring and onboarding process. The hiring process. There's a reason why there's a saying: hire slow, fire fast. You want the right individuals, and I think from a skill set perspective, you can find them. It's really the behavioral characteristics. So I'll go through a lot of behavioral analysis, and also culture fit. Right? Are they going to be a good culture fit for the organization? Super important.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw me nodding and smiling. That's the smile of recognition. I've got a VP of sales who doesn't hold people accountable. Are you kidding me? Why is that person here? My experience is that quite often, sales managers are salespeople that got promoted but never got trained. So you've lost probably one of your best salespeople, and now you've got them leading a team who were probably there. It's all their friends who they were working with yesterday, and they don't know how to manage salespeople. And selling and managing salespeople are two completely different things. Completely
Yeah.
different. And when it comes to hiring, I'm with you 1,000,000%. It's difficult to take that blank slate, because I'm doing the same thing with a company in Brooklyn right now. I'm building them a sales team from scratch, and it's exciting, but it's a lot of work. But it is good, because now you get people, the exact people that you want to work with and that are going to be good for you. And the other thing I find so many times is, because one of the things I've done is I've observed clients as they're doing interviews for salespeople, or salespeople, you don't interview them the same way you interview anybody else. I don't care where you see yourself in 5 years. I don't care what your spirit animal is. I only care about one thing. Well, two things. What's your motivation and drive? Do you want to make a lot of money or not? And are you willing to do the work? Can you sell? If you can't sell, I mean, I can train you from scratch, but most people are trying to hire people with at least a little experience. By the way, I like working with people right out of college who've never sold before, because again, it's a blank slate, but it's a lot more work. So we talked about 3 pillars, I think, and I think that leaves analytics. Is that right? And I'm assuming by analytics, are you referring to KPIs?
Yeah. Just putting together the right KPIs, putting together a dashboard that someone can look at on a daily basis. And I tell people there's really two types of KPIs you want to look at. Actions, right? So from your sales force, what have the actions been during the week in terms of number of conversions, number of calls, activity based. And then there's the financial metrics, right? So are you looking at your book bill ratio? Is it adequate to look at it on a quarterly basis? Do you have to look at it on a monthly basis? What's the sales turn? And I always tell them that, because sometimes you have business owners and they just love data. And I say you don't want any KPI that's not actionable is a waste of your time. You're clogging up brain cells for no reason, because if you can't do anything with the data, it's not worth looking at. So we look at really actionable items. And, in terms of sales, where are you relative to plan? What's your conversion rate? How do you optimize that? I mean, those are the things that we want to have on a dashboard that people can look at and say, even if it's trending, okay, things are starting to slip. Why is that, right? And it might be as a group, might be as on an individual basis, but that's where you really need to dig in and look at it and say, do we really need to reforecast the year because we're really in trouble here? Or is it a systemic problem, or do we have a unique person problem we just need to fix?
Yeah, I'm with you. We want just enough information to give us good insight, but not too much. You might laugh at this. Years ago, I had a client. I'm not kidding, literally needed a magnifying glass to read their spreadsheets because there was so much information on it. It was unusable to me. I want to know just enough information so I know what my people are doing, because once you've got real data, you can help people achieve any goal. And I'm with you. I want to know about activity. How many calls are you making? How many dials or how many emails are you sending? What are you doing and what's the result you're getting? If you're leaving voicemails, how many people call you back? If you're sending emails, how many people respond? Because when you know that, you know what people's average sales cycle is and their average dollar volume per sale, I can help you achieve any goal. But without that information, you're kind of winging it. And winging it and using hope as a strategy doesn't work. We've got a couple of questions. Amin says, I have a question about closing a client. Okay, why don't you ask the question? I'm going to take somebody else's, then we'll come back to you. I mean, what is your actual question about closing a client? John Hill wants to know, have you ever asked how long does it take to close a sale?
Yeah, so sales cycle is something that I'm always asking about, right? Because it makes a huge difference in terms of the compensation system. So traditional business, just to give you an example, traditional business, if it's a relatively short sales cycle, you're going to pay commission on revenue. And that's meaningful, right? Because someone gets the order, the product or service is delivered or performed, then you pay them commission. The reward is remembered for what the action was. I worked in a business where the sales cycle was over a year. It could be 1 to 2 years. We actually paid commission on bookings. So there's different levels of, or different ways to pay salespeople, but it has to be meaningful. The reward system has got to be meaningful to them to continue to incentivize them. So I always ask about sales cycle.
Yeah, me too. Every company I walk into, well, first of all, they have the same problem, which is their people aren't prospecting enough. But the other thing is, every VP of sales says to me, my sales cycle is too long. How do we shorten it up? And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. That one that took 1 to 2 years, was that enterprise software sales by any chance?
No, it was military and nuclear.
Oh, wow. Interesting stuff. Okay. So you help a business create, document, and implement the 4 pillars of success that you talked about. What's next? often sales organizations get extremely excited about the latest thing they've decided to try, but in many cases, it's just not long lasting. How do you ensure that the things you've built for them actually get adhered to?
Well, I can't ensure other than talking to the sales leader if they have a sales leader on staff and making sure that that individual has bought in, right? Because if they buy in, they're going to continue on with the systems. They may tweak them over time, but ultimately they're going to be the accountability managers for all the things that we worked on. Oftentimes, there is no sales leader, and I'm working as the fractional sales leader, fractional VP of sales, whatever you call it. And I hold them accountable, right? So I'm making sure that these things stick. So if I can assume that role for 1 to 2 years, I can continue to drive those concepts forward and they become sticky in the organization. And then when they're ready to bring on a full-time sales executive, someone who's got the right level of experience for that role, absolutely, I'd work with them for a period just to make sure they understood everything that we've put in place, how it's been successful, and what they need to do to keep it going.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Hamid says, my question is that. So Hamid, I'm not sure. Are you asking how do you close a client? But he has another question. Is it good to pitch someone in a first message or email? What do you think of that?
Absolutely not, especially today, right? So digital marketing is about establishing relationships. Talk about LinkedIn, right? You're not going to pitch someone on your first LinkedIn message. You're going to try to develop a relationship with the individual, really understand what they need. What are their pain points? How do you pitch anything before you understand what the needs are? You can't. Same with email, right? And people are so inundated with email these days. It's a challenge just for them to look at the email. A lot of it depends on the subject line. If your subject line isn't attractive enough, they're not even going to read the content, right? So don't waste your time. All you're looking to do is establish is there mutual interest in a discussion? Is this something you're potentially interested in? Love to have a 15, 30-minute discussion to see if there's any benefit in moving forward with the conversation, right? I mean, so that's the way I would always position it. Otherwise, you're selling a commodity like you're selling bread. You could probably do it if you're selling bread. Are you hungry? I've got a loaf of bread. It's $1. Do you want it? I'll sell it to you.
Yeah. So first of all, I hate the word pitch. I just despise it. It brings to mind, the old style of selling. So I always suggest salespeople get that out of your vocabulary. And no, Chris is absolutely right, Hamid. It's not right to pitch on a first email or a first message. It's like me walking into a bar and seeing a good-looking woman say, "Hey, come back to my place." Not hello, no drinks, no dates, no nothing. Just come back to my place. It doesn't work. I mean, if I was as handsome as Chris, maybe, but it doesn't work for me. So you want to develop a relationship first. And I'm consistently stunned at how many times I'll accept somebody's connection request on LinkedIn and immediately get a DM that says, "I'd like to talk to you about how I help coaches like you do blah 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 blah." It just doesn't make sense. I'm with you, Chris, 1,000,000%. If I'm going to email a VP of sales, it's going to sound something like this. If you were the VP of sales, "Hey, Chris, a lot of the vice presidents of sales I'm talking with are telling me their sales cycle is way too long. If this is a problem that you have too, might be worth a conversation, blah, blah, blah." I believe if you want to send that first message, try to talk about something that they have a problem with and that you might be able to help them. But that, "Hey, I'd love to have a meeting to tell you why we're the greatest training company in the world," doesn't work. That's old style selling. And look, a lot of things still work that are old style. Yeah, Chris, I'm assuming you've been in this game a long time. I've been in sales for 48 years. But one thing that still applies is that people do business with people they like and trust. And if you don't take the time to establish that up front, then they don't want to listen to anything you have to say, whether you call it a pitch or a presentation or anything else. So that's what I would say. John Hill wants to know, how many presidents have you run into that do not want their salespeople to make more money than they do? That's a great question.
Most of them, but I always I'll test that, right? So owners have an interesting. When we say presidents, more likely the business owner.
Sure.
but they have an interesting way of looking at things, right? So they pay themselves a salary. They don't count the distribution they take at the end of the year. They only count the salary. Well, and they don't count the equity that they're building or the enterprise value in their company. So as a salesperson brings in revenue, and again, this ties back to the comp plan. The comp plan needs to be a win-win for both the stakeholders, whoever that may be, owner, president, whatever, and the salesperson. And if you've got the right compensation plan, you shouldn't care how much they make, because every dollar they make, the company's making 5 or 10 or 20, right? So it's beneficial to both. And ultimately, I mean, I've been in a situation where I've had salespeople make more than me as a sales leader. And you know what? Fantastic. And it's interesting because a lot of salespeople have been programmed by those owners and presidents, and they look at a comp plan that's uncapped and say, well, you guys are never going to pay out if I exceed my quota. And then the first time you pay out when they exceed their quota, especially if you have accelerators, they're like, oh, this is how it's going to work. And then the game on, right? So then they're just all over it, and they're making tons and tons of money. And every time they're just amazed they get that big fat check. And I always look at them and say, you know what? The owner is much happier than you are. So as happy as you are, fantastic. And I want you to continue and make a ton of money. The owner's doing just as well and is just as happy to write the check.
Exactly. I mean, you should want your salespeople to make more than you do, because every time they close business, you're making money, assuming your pricing is right and the compensation for the salespeople is right, and you're so on target with that. So many times salespeople get approached to, hey, we want to promote you, we want to make you a manager, and that really sounds good to them because they think they're going to make more money and work less hard. When actually you're going to work way harder than any of your salespeople, and quite often you do make less than them. If you're doing your job right, you're helping them make tons and tons of money, but that's the reward. You shouldn't go into sales management unless you truly love helping people succeed. And that means sometimes they're going to make more money than you, but if your comp is right, every time as the manager or the owner of the company, every time they close a deal, you're making money too. You should want them to, and I'm with you 1,000,000%. Commissions should never be capped. Encourage your salespeople to make as much money as possible. I went to work for a company as the national sales director and was warned in advance that this company doesn't like to pay anybody more than $125,000 a year. And this was 35 years ago, I think. And between my salary, which they forced me to take, by the way, I said, I don't want any salary. Just give me overrides on my team. I'm going to build you a huge team, and just give me the overrides. But they forced me to. But to say once you make 125, we're going to change your structure, that's ridiculous. It's a disincentive instead of an incentive. Stupid as far as I'm concerned. John Hill has another question. When you hire a salesperson, do you also talk with their wife or girlfriend? I guess you're assuming that you're hiring only men, John, but assuming that they're women, would you also talk to the husband or boyfriend? How do you answer that one?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So the answer I have is no. I'm not sure that's the right answer, though. And I can tell you that from my personal experience, I got a job once early in my career, and my direct manager was the VP of sales. And before I started working, he invited my wife and I out to dinner with he and his wife.
Smart.
Had a great meal, great conversation, and my wife was sold. Right, so boy, what a great guy he is. It's going to be great to work at this company. It gets them in the right mindset. So I think that's an area I probably could have improved upon. So even though I didn't do it, I think it's probably the right move to make. Well, here's another thing. It goes into company culture, and so I had someone who was working for me, and he was actually working as a VP of sales at another company, and they had a horrible culture, right? So revolving door, nobody wanted to work there. They just waited for their annual increase, and once they got it, they're happy for a week and then continue to complain. And they hired a consultant to come in to work on the culture, and it took 2 or 3 years. But part of that was integrating the families of the employees, whether it be a husband or a wife, in events, in dinners with the managers. And he said in 3 years there were people lined up outside their building wanting to work there. That's the power of culture. So yeah, back to your original question. I wish I did it. I didn't. I think the people that do are way ahead of those that don't, particularly when you're working on building a great company culture.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And like you, I also don't speak to the husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever the gender relationship is. But I certainly do always ask, have you spoken with your husband? Have you spoken with your wife? What do they think? Are they going to be supportive? Because John is right that, if the significant other does not support the person who's actually doing the selling, there's going to be an issue. And it can be a real challenge. So good point, John. I want to move to a different topic because I really do believe that prospecting is where most companies fall down, and most salespeople fall down. They're simply not meeting with enough qualified prospects. So let's talk about lead conversion. I was asked just yesterday, I gave a talk in New York City, and I was asked whether it's better to let salespeople develop their own leads and appointments or to develop a BDR team. I certainly had an opinion on that. What's your opinion on how do we maximize converting the leads that we have to clients?
It's a great question. I think it's a hard question I don't think there's any one right answer because I think a lot of it depends on the company. So I worked with some small companies that don't have the resources to have a BDR. So by default, the salesperson has to prospect in order to get business. Just has to be that way. When you get to a certain size in business, in order to be most efficient, I think the salespeople should be supplied with the leads. So a BDR is going out, getting the leads, massaging the lead, whatever's coming in from marketing, converting it from an MQL to an SQL, and then giving it to the salespeople to go out and make that discovery call or move the process, and whatever the process is, move the process through the various stages to close. And that's the most efficient way possible. A lot of it depends on resources available. I mean, but I guess I think that's the most efficient way to use salespeople. Not always possible in a really small company that's cash strapped.
Yeah, and I'm always torn on that one because I think nobody cares more, excuse me, about your leads and your appointments than you do as the salesperson. But I want my salespeople selling all day long, and every moment you're doing business development and trying to make calls or send emails or whatever you're doing, that's time you can't actually be selling. So I'm with you. It's a tough one, and you walk a fine line. So if they are going to set their own appointments and get their own leads, what are some of the fundamental business development skills that salespeople need to have?
That's a great question, and I think one of the core competencies that salespeople should understand is about their prospects' behavior styles. So I also have a training course, a business development skills course, and one of the things that I teach sales teams on is how to identify the personality style you're working with. So you've got a range, right? Think about the fastest decision maker, really high risk taker, on the borderline of narcissistic, if not narcissistic. It's all about them, they're the life of the party. To the other side of the spectrum, somebody who's probably introverted, really data driven, need a lot of data. They need a lot of touches in order to close. Really understanding who that individual is and documenting that because it sets the stage for the rest of the process, right? So that's one. Second, what I found is they're not networking. Most salespeople are not networking in professional organizations. They're networking in industry associations, right? Where they have to, and they're not doing it well. It's a social event. They don't treat it as a prospecting exercise, a lot of them. And I tell you firsthand, it's one of the hard lessons I learned going from corporate to consultant. I didn't know how to network. I didn't know how to prospect real well. I had to find the resources to help me get there. And I realized if I had known when I started my career what I know now in terms of networking, I would have done things 100% differently. And there's something else that we teach, and that is you never stop networking. So no matter where you are, you have to be a social animal. You have to be ready, willing, and able to talk to people, strike up a conversation, and be truly interested in who they are and what they do. And you'd be amazed at where that leads, right? That always leads to an interesting conversation. I can remember being on a plane heading down to Houston. This is when I was in the oil and gas industry, and this individual was heading to the same trade show, happened to work for one of our highest target companies, or one of our target clients. So, of course, I didn't share that, but I was able to pick his brain and learn a lot about the organization and ultimately feed that back to the sales team. Basically, these are the folks you really need to get in contact with in order to move this thing forward. And ultimately, we were successful in doing that. But you just never know.
Yeah, and you're right. Not only should salespeople never stop networking, they should never stop prospecting. Period.
Right.
Whatever type of prospecting, excuse me, you're going to do, you got to do it consistently and effectively, because if you're good at it but it's inconsistent, at some point you're going to have a period where you just can't close any business because 2 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, whatever the time frame is, you stop prospecting. And it's not like prospect today and close business tomorrow. If we could all prospect today and close business and get made tomorrow, we'd all prospect every day. But because there's a gap between the actual prospecting and getting a paycheck in your pocket, salespeople lose it, and they get inconsistent. Let's face it, it's the thing that we almost always like doing the least. I don't want to prospect. I just want to be in front of live prospects and help them choose to do business with me. So because we don't like doing it, we almost use any excuse to stop. I have to write a proposal, boss. I can't prospect today. And when you string enough of those days together, when you don't prospect, that's when you get what I always call the ups and downs of selling. The good week followed by the bad week, and the good month followed by the bad month, and so on. Often I find that sales reps who are good at finding and closing new business, which of course is crucial, but often I find that they're not good at managing an account that they've brought in. So what should we know about account management and developing long-lasting relationships that keep clients on board a long time and offer you cross-selling and upselling opportunities?
So are you talking pre-sale or post-sale?
Post.
Yeah. So post, it's interesting. Now that can be industry specific, right? So in the software world, in the big enterprise software companies, they have a team that continues to nurture clients. The salesperson is not encouraged to continue to talk to the existing client. They should be off selling new business. I mean, it's something I recently learned. I didn't know that was how the larger enterprise companies worked. In the world I come from, it's up to the salesperson to continue to nurture the accounts, right? So on a regular cadence, following up with a client, depending, and again, you have to be smart about it, right? So your biggest clients, you probably want to touch more than your smaller clients, but whatever the right cadence is, we're calling them on a regular basis to see how the product or service that you're providing is going, making sure everything is great, they're still loving it. If there's a problem, bring it back to the organization and fixing the problem, being proactive. So I think, what kind of skills do business development or salespeople need to do that? It needs to be built into the process, right? So the reason I found out about the software thing is I did a presentation with a person that she really focuses on mindset. She came out of the software space. And one of the steps in my process is post-sales. And we had a debate about that. Like, well, we don't have post-sales in our process. Post-sales is handled by a whole other department. I said, okay, well, somehow we're going to have to navigate through this because post-sales is a really important component for most other people who are trying to continue to increase the value of the client. Because look, let's face it, what's the hard part of getting business? It's getting the client. Once you have the client and you're doing a great job for them, the ability to cross-sell upsell, continue to service. That's a lot easier than trying to go out and find someone else, and a lot less expensive for the company. So definitely that nurturing has to be part of your post-sale process. And you can do a lot of it digitally these days. There's a ton of tools out there to do it. You can make touches automatically. And with the advent of AI, it can be even more personalized and look personalized, but still recommend that personal touch, whatever the right cadence is.
Yeah. I already mentioned that I hate the word pitch, but at some point, we have to tell the prospect what we're going to do for them. We have to make a presentation. So what are some of the things that salespeople need to know in order to give an effective presentation?
Well, an effective presentation is really based on the quality of their discovery call. So what they really need to know is how to make the best discovery call first, get all the information. And in that call, what you're trying to do is identify their pain points. What are the things that are causing your prospect pain that you can relieve? And that really forms the basis of any presentation. The presentation can be verbal, it can be on PowerPoint, whatever mechanism you choose to display it. The message has to be about what benefit your product or service brings to the client to relieve those pain points. That's the message that it actually, so I'll step back a little bit. We call that running the bases, right? Running the bases in terms of understanding a client's current situation. What are their goals for the future situation? What are the challenges that stand in their way to getting to their goals? Those challenges are the pain points. Once you understand that, you're lined up now to give a great presentation, sell your benefits, or describe your benefits. Customers like to buy; they don't like to be sold, right? So let's forget about the word sell, because apparently today in 2024 it has a negative connotation to it. Selling is bad for whatever reason. So let's just say we're providing solutions, and if we make a compelling enough description of the solution we're providing, your prospect will buy.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Sales organizations often want to make things more complicated than they need to be. But there's a word you've used a couple of times, which I completely agree with. So many times in the presentation, they're focused on the features and not the benefits. And of course, you're going to discuss the features of what you have to offer, but you have to tie every feature to its corresponding benefit, because people don't buy features. I don't have heated seats in my car because I want heated seats. I have heated seats in my car because I want my butt to be warm when I get in my car. It's the benefit. I don't care if there's somebody lighting a fire underneath my seat, as long as it doesn't burn my car down. As long as when I get in, my tushy is warm, because I don't want to be cold. I mean, it's supposed to snow here in New York today, and tomorrow I'll go down to 28 again. So it's the benefit that I'm buying, and that's what everybody is looking for. And it's so often that salespeople miss that. I also find that sometimes salespeople, they don't sound enthusiastic in their presentation about what they've got to offer. And I truly believe that enthusiasm is contagious. So if you're not excited, why would your prospect get excited? And people don't part with their money unless they get excited about getting that benefit that you're talking about. And the other thing I always advise salespeople that must be included in any effective presentation is what I call a verbal truth story, which is a story about somebody else like you, Mr. or Ms. Prospect, who by doing business with us lived happily ever after. Because most people's, the way brain science works is we think negatively when we're making the buying decision, right? What if it goes wrong? What if I hire Chris and sales don't go up? What if? So when we tell a story about a similar client, somebody who was in a similar situation to the prospect we're speaking to, and we tell them how it worked out happily ever after, and they loved us and we increased sales, or whatever the actual thing we did is, it helps people get past that of trying to avoid making a bad decision. But would you agree or no?
I do agree, and I think it's all part of you building value into the benefit you're providing. So, it's amazing how sometimes you make a quick connection with people. So I'm actually talking to a local company about training, right? About a training program. And he just really liked what I had to say. And so he said, you know what? We're trying to close the biggest deal that this company has ever had. And he's describing the situation. where they basically are working with an engineer and they're working with a CEO. The engineer's totally bought in. CEO hasn't bought in yet. And so I went on to describe to him the fact that the CEO hasn't bought in because he hasn't received the right value proposition. I said, so what does that mean? I said, let me describe it to you very simply. So his name's Jeff. I said, hey, Jeff, if I told you that if you gave me $1, I'm going to give you 5 back, would you take the deal? Yeah, of course I take the deal. I'll take it every day, every minute, every however fast I can pump dollar bills into your hand. I want the 5 back, right? That's where you need to get the CEO to, because right now he's not seeing the value, and engineers and CEOs think differently, right? So engineers, it's that bright, shiny object. Yeah, I'd love to have it. I'd love to have it. And I gave him the example of, yeah, we had a case where our engineers came to management and said, we want to spend $50,000 in this document management system. That was the message. And the owner said, well, what's wrong with the filing cabinets? They've worked for the past 50 years. Is there a problem with the filing cabinets? They didn't put together the value proposition, right? So sometimes you even need to sell internally. You have to develop the value proposition for people to buy off on it. So it's all about value. Are you getting more value than you're paying for? That's what everybody wants.
Gotcha. We only have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you this one. Let's say somebody is in sales and they want to go into sales management or sales leadership. What are some of the skills that they need to become an effective sales leader?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I try to break it down into a number of different things, but the core element of sales leadership, I'd ask why. Why do you want to be a sales leader? What does that mean to you? And if it's because, well, I can make more money. No, maybe not, right? I mean, not a good reason. But if you're the type of personality where what's the true function of a sales leader? Is to break down the barriers that are in front of your salespeople, keeping them from being successful. If you have that mentality, okay, you're starting on the right track. The other stuff is tactical, right? I mean, you can learn the other things, right? Do you do buddy calls with your salespeople? How to hold salespeople accountable? What tools do you use to measure them up? Those are all things. You could teach those. That's easy. It's the mentality of it. And if you don't have a servant mentality, you're probably not the right guy for the role, because the old days of Glenn Ross, that type of sales leader, that doesn't exist. That does not exist today. You can't do that. And I think that type of relationship with your sales team, it fosters growth. And when they realize you're working for them, you're working to help them be successful, they'll do anything for you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You have to take great joy in helping other people succeed. I love the word you use, that servant mentality. And I could not agree more. The job of the sales manager or sales leader is, how do I take away every obstacle, every excuse, everything that gets in the way of you, my salespeople, being successful? When you do that, you just let them fly. That's when you have a great sales team. And Chris, we are out of time, so I'm going to share my screen. Would you tell people, if they're interested in getting in touch with you, how maybe to work with you, or they have some questions, how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my contact information is on the screen. My website is frable-llc.com. Email is cspafford@frablellc.com. And I have my phone number up there, which is 860-294-6272. That phone's on 24/7, 365. Love to talk to folks about their problems. If I can offer any suggestions to help, love to do that.
Well, I'm hoping that you don't get a lot of calls at 2 a.m. for this, but it's nice that it's on 24/7. Chris, it's been great speaking with you. I really appreciate you generously sharing your brilliance with us. And I'll end as I always do, guys. Please remember, sales is a game of making things happen. So get out there and make sales happen. Have a great weekend, Chris. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you next time. Have a great one.
Thank you so much, Jeff.